Welcome back to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. I'm excited to share this story with you, so let's dive in. All right, welcome back to Between the Before and After. What would it be like to grow up in poverty and be forced to actually drop out of high school to work to make ends meet, but through the power of determination and an unwillingness to give up on dreams to become a highly polished professional, an author, an executive coach, and a licensed psychotherapist? This is the story of Dr. Gina Simmons Schneider. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So before we dive into it, why don't we just let people know what it is that you're up to currently?
I am a licensed psychotherapist and I write for Psychology Today. And I also do executive coaching. So I mostly help executives manage conflicts in the workplace, stress, anxiety, anger, those sorts of things. The hard stuff with humans.
Given sort of sometimes the current economic situation and what we've been through the last few years, I imagine there probably is a lot of stress and and tension and anxiety that kind of shows up in the workplace. How does coaching differ from psychotherapy?
That's a very good question. I think people get very confused about it, and it's important to have good boundaries between what coaches do and what psychotherapists do. Psychotherapists are often helping people manage pain and distress from perhaps childhood issues or a lot of emotional distress that requires psychotherapeutic tools like cognitive behavioral therapy,
Right.
Those sorts of things. Coaching is really helping people with specific goals and providing them with tools that might be different kinds of tools. It might be a goal-setting worksheets. It might be inspirational tools to become more motivated. It might become ADHD tools to help you stay organized and focused.
Right.
But it's really not based on emotional distress.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually also about planning kind of future things you want to accomplish. So sometimes there can be a blurring because we can be, human emotions always are with us,
right?
No matter where we go. But the tools are different, and the goals and the purpose of them are different. So I think a good ethical coach would refer someone to a psychotherapist if they start getting into talking about their marital disputes or talking about their family of origin pain or past trauma. They should refer them to a psychotherapist. And a psychotherapist, I often refer to coaches for, for example, business coaching things like that, to help people develop a good business plan and stick to goals that they want to achieve.
Mm-hmm. So there's a whole gamut of sort of human emotions and experiences that make us sort of the complex beings that we are. And you wear both of these hats. Do you ever find yourself, or would it be unethical to refer a coaching client to your practice as a psychotherapist or vice versa?
It is. I mean, I think it's not considered the best thing to do to see somebody in a coaching capacity and then become their psychotherapist as well. Sometimes if there is a gap, in time between the two things and the boundaries are clearly delineated and the protections are all in place, that can occur. But as a general rule, it's not advisable.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the word boundaries, and I think boundaries are something that a lot of human beings struggle with. And so in your capacity as a psychotherapist, you're working with people in like very, very vulnerable situations where they're possibly exposing like their deepest pains, their most raw emotions and things like that. And how do you manage it and such? Because I imagine that the possibility exists that because you're helping someone through such a distressed state that they might view the therapist-client relationship in kind of a different light. And how do you maintain boundaries in that kind of situation where somebody might start to misunderstand the relationship between therapist and client?
Yes, and that's a good question, and that is something that is drilled into our training as therapists. And every year, every 2 years, when we get relicensed, we have to have completed 6 hours of legal and ethical training, so that we are really, really drilled over and over again on how to maintain professional boundaries.
Mm.
So the how of it varies a lot from client to client. For example, you might need to be very, very reassert boundaries over and over again with certain
Mhm.
types of people who want to. Like I've had people just. Um, I had one person gentleman come into my office. I was in a group practice, and I had gone out for lunch, and I came back, and he had already been inside my office when I wasn't there, and set up a complete stereo system in there in my office to play
Right.
me the music that he wanted me to hear, that he had
Mhm.
heard. And I had to explain to him, "You're not allowed in my office if I haven't invited you there, and you're not allowed to bring in equipment." And, some people just push boundaries. In other words,
Mhm.
they don't, uh, they don't understand where the limits are, and so you have to keep reasserting them. But, the therapeutic relationship is safe for people because of the confidentiality,
Mhm.
because of
Mhm.
the fact that it is a unique relationship that is unlike any other relationship. This is a person who is there just for you and just
Mhm.
for your emotional needs. And
Right.
I'm not there to get my needs met. So you
Right. Yeah,
have to
yeah.
please me. You can get mad at me. You can tell me your truth. You don't have to take care of my feelings. So it's
Right.
a very special, sacred relationship. So that's why the boundaries protect clients, and
Mhm. Mhm.
some of them aren't as comfortable with them.
Right. You mentioned something interesting. I never really thought about, I guess, somebody like getting mad at you and sort of yelling. I mean, I imagine people would do that, but might like sort of to direct it towards you. And so, how do you? I mean, maybe it's a bit of a skill that you practice, but create a separation, understanding that what's being directed at you isn't really about you, but about what the individual is experiencing. When, in the moment, maybe you have an individual who is experiencing quite a high level of emotional distress, and it's all coming out.
Right, and I used to do family therapy, and I also used to specialize in anger management for teens. So I was with a lot of angry, raging families for a long time, and
Right.
so it's quite easy to handle that because my North Star is always what's in the therapeutic best interest of my client. So in it, and it is important to be able to see when someone is angry, their force is coming towards you. You're seeing energy coming towards you, and you can work with it. If people are expressing their anger, no matter how inelegantly or rudely it might be coming out, it is energy coming towards you that you can then work with. And
Mm,
often when people get a chance to express themselves and they feel like someone can handle it, I can sit there, I can handle it, I can listen
yeah.
carefully, I can, help them understand their own feeling. Then the arc goes up in the rage, and then it comes down, and then there's
Yeah.
a sort of an opportunity for some resolution to start to take place. So
Right.
yes, we do have those skills. We are trained in those skills. Some therapists are less comfortable because they aren't working with that level of intensity.
Mhm.
But I did a lot of work with very intense things very early in my career, so
Right.
it's not a big deal for me.
Fascinating. I think the better that you kind of understand the human brain and how it functions, maybe the easier it is to create a bit of separation between this is like a personal affront versus this is somebody expressing something needs to get out. And it kind of lends itself to the question. Um, I'm not sure how to phrase this, but I think about like emotions and feelings being trapped in the body and what it might sort of manifest in terms of our health, not just mentally but also physically. Because you mentioned like it's like a type of energy coming towards you, and then giving somebody the space to vent that, however, as you said, rudely or inelegantly it might happen. There's like a release that's taking place, and it's almost like there's a bit of healing that can take place because there's the opportunity to get it out of the body, to speak it out of the body, in a sense.
Yes, I mean, I think that when we are feeling a lot of rage, we use those metaphors of, I'm hitting the boiling point, or I'm starting
Mhm.
feel like I'm going to explode, as if we feel a buildup in our body of some kind of substance. And
Right.
if we
Yeah.
can explode it out, we'll get it out of ourselves. So we have a lot of metaphors for anger that talk about that. Now, the fact of the matter is that we do feel some relief more in being understood
Mhm.
necessarily than in expressing anger as anger. In other words, we try to teach people anger management means not bottling it up, but also not exploding on all over everybody. Because when we explode our anger all over everybody, we might feel good in the moment, but then we have a big, big mess to clean up in our relationships. And
Yeah.
sometimes we get fired, right, from our job because we were inappropriate. And then you go to anger management, and that's what we do. Um, so what we try to teach people is that, having anger or feeling the feelings, it's not going to hurt you, but there is some relief in feeling understood and
Mhm.
feeling just that sense that someone else wants to hear you out and wants to understand and cares about how you feel.
Yeah.
And that there is some healing in that, and
Yeah.
and also in getting some clarity on what it is you're really feeling and why.
Yeah.
Because then that can start to point towards what could help bring relief.
Mhm. I think a lot about just like producing language, whether spoken or written, just does something to sort of clear up the muddle that we might be experiencing in our brain at any given time. So
It
I'm
does.
curious, yeah. How did you like when you were a child? Did you have this idea that I want to help people as a psychotherapist? And I asked that sort of a little bit tongue in cheek because I imagine that wasn't exactly your thought. But and maybe what did you think you were going to do with your life as a child?
Well, it's funny. I as a child, I was raised in a family with no real money or resources. We really were living in poverty for much of my childhood, and but we were raised with a lot of creative imagination and a lot of encouragement to be creative.
Mhm.
So we were always making things. We were making up songs. We were, doing all kinds of creative things. And I think also one of the things that was big about my personality, because I'm an older sibling and I had a younger sister,
Mm,
and I always thought about protecting her and taking care of her.
okay.
And I was the kid in second grade that protected the kindergartners from the
Okay.
bullies.
Okay.
So I would tell the bullies to back off and leave them alone, leave those little kids alone. And so there was always this part of me that liked to observe how people behaved and why are some people popular? Why are some people bullies? Uh, why do some people get victimized?
Mhm.
Those were questions that I think were always with me. And so human psychology was always an interest, even though when I was in second grade, I didn't call it that, nor did I know that it would be a career interest one day.
Right, right. And you mentioned
Mm.
growing up in poverty, and where was it that you grew up? And I guess building on that, do you when you look back now, what can you observe about how growing up in poverty might have affected your outlook on life?
That's a big question. We did grow up kind of in a lot of different places. We moved a lot.
Mhm.
My parents started out in the Air Force, and so we lived in California, Hawaii, and back in a lot of different places in California. And then my dad left the Air Force, and he was a big dreamer, and so he was a big dreamer, but he didn't have a lot of good sense, nor was he very well capitalized. So he had a lot of businesses. About every 6 months to a year, we would be in a new business. He was a filmmaker. We lived in Nevada, and he made a documentary film about the gold rush called The Mystery of Gold Fever. And so when I was a little kid, I'm in this one-room schoolhouse in gold
Mm.
country, living like the Wild West. And then we had a furniture business in San Francisco and then in LA. And so we moved all over. And my dad, we just kind of followed him on all these different dreams that he had. So we ended up landing in San Diego, and then my dad made a anti-Vietnam War fictional feature film.
Mm-hmm.
And again, not very well capitalized. He was the producer, and we were all involved in all of his businesses growing up. So
Right.
I was involved with casting in LA and in handling the props, and I was an extra in the scenes and on and on. So he did that and then went bankrupt. And after that, my
Okay.
parents divorced.
Mm.
And so then we were always kind of living on a shoestring. And then when he left, he kind of really left. I mean, not like some parents break up and they still stay in touch with their kids. He left. So there was no support, and he was just gone. So that was a real pivotal time in my life, because I was 15 and we were on the verge of homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother sat me down and showed me in numbers why it wasn't adding up, and we didn't have enough for food. If she paid all the bills to keep us housed with the lights on, we would run out of money every month.
Mm-hmm.
So I realized that, I had to work. So 15-year-olds that look like 12-year-olds at the time,
Yeah.
with very few skills in a poor neighborhood and no transportation. You're walking around trying to do, I did car washing, I did house cleaning, I did babysitting, but there in a poor neighborhood, there aren't a lot of people that'll pay kids to do jobs. So I lied about
Right.
my age and started doing telephone sales.
Okay.
And I got exploited by a corrupt telephone sales company, my first job. And I realized that they were using underage labor, because the deal was you worked for 2 days, and if you got 7 leads, you'd get the paid job. And so
Okay.
I got my 7 sales, not leads, but sales. I got my 7
Mm-hmm.
sales, and I'm like, oh, yay, I get a job, and then they said, oh, one of the sales dropped out, so we aren't going to hire you. And then I saw that their ad was in the paper like forever, and that they just used underage unpaid labor. And there was
Oh,
nothing we could do, because
how do you fight it? Yeah.
I'm 15. What am I going to do? Right. So I learned the hard way to never work for commission, and,
Mm-hmm.
to try to work for legitimate businesses. But anyway, yeah, it was a struggle. And so my mother and my little sister and I did everything we could to make it work. And we didn't get evicted, and we weren't homeless. But it was close.
Mm-hmm.
And but we were food insecure for part of the month. So my money paid for, food. So
Yeah.
necessities of life.
Yeah, and so prior to your dad leaving, there was a lot of moving around. You mentioned from place to place, and I just wonder how that affects a child's sense of security when it's really, really difficult to put down any roots, or you form friendships, then you move to another location, and then you form other friendships, and then you move to another location, and so on. And how does that affect sort of social development and forming of friendships?
I think I think, like a lot of kids who grow up in the military, it's similar. You learn to make friends quickly. You
Okay.
learn to connect quickly. I think that is one of the gifts from moving around a lot, is you learn how to join into a group. You learn how to talk to people. Either that, or I guess there are some people who will just remain isolated. But I learned pretty quickly, I think, how to talk to people. I think also the idea of security was very different. Like, I remember getting a job at a nonprofit, which was a really cool job. It was one of my favorite jobs I ever worked. And I did job readiness trainings, and I did counseling, and I got to wear every hat I wanted to wear and be creative and develop programs. It was a great job. But in the interview, they said, we only have a 1-year contract for this position. Well, to be offered a job that was guaranteed for a year sounded like security to me.
Right, right.
Because I'm like, yeah, great. This is great. And I ended up working there several years because they kept getting the contracts renewed for the work we were doing. And it was real meaningful work. But yeah, so when you grow up with a lot of instability, your idea of stability is very different from someone who,
Mhm.
I had a friend who grew up in Pennsylvania and came to San Diego, got married, lived with her husband, but she still called Pennsylvania home. She's living
Right,
here with her husband, but home is, this compound where her family lived for 100 years.
right, right.
So it was a whole different attitude of what security means, right? It's something that has to last generations or something. So I never had that sort of sense. I think in some ways that was a gift because security really is an illusion. It's a
Yeah.
made up concept. It's like the George Carlin, the comedian, says, life is a near death experience, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and I think the reality is that there is no security. It's sort of a myth, and
Mhm, mm.
striving for security is a fruitless cause. I think um, we can have periods of stability in our life that make us feel secure,
Mhm.
but the reality is that could all go away with the first flood,
Yeah.
fire,
Yeah,
whatever, right?
absolutely.
Economic collapse. There's just lots of ways so we have the main security is our own capacity to adapt and survive. So I think
Mm.
that's where I get my sense of security from, is I can adapt.
Okay, yeah, you know that you can survive in a number of different situations and you can make connections and network and whatnot. So you started working at 15. You had to drop out of school. When were you able to return to getting an education? And were there ever times that you resented having to work instead of going to school?
I think the so what happened was, so I was 15, I was working, and of course transportation costs money. So I my high school was about 4 miles from my house. So there was time and money in getting to and from high school, right? Taking the
Mhm.
bus costs money, and walking, 4 miles took time, which took away time that I needed to spend working. So, um, then I had so I'm 16 and I'm going to high school. I'm going to this inner city school, and I have this horrific experience with a racist teacher. And what happened was he wrote he was a world geography teacher,
Mhm.
and one of the kids in the class had written Chicano Power on the blackboard prior to him walking in. And that was during the civil rights and a lot of civil rights marches and the Vietnam War. And so there were a lot of social upheaval, like what is happening now. And so this teacher saw that on the blackboard and went into a whole angry rant about how terrible Mexicans were, and how terrible Black people were, and that he had and he didn't call them Black people. He didn't use polite language. He was raging.
Mhm, mhm.
And he said that there were 4 Black people in the class, and he got 2 of them kicked out, and he was going to get the other 2 kicked out. And one of the Black people in the class was my girlfriend, and she sat right behind me. I sat in the front row. So I'm very close to him, and he's spitting and raging, and it was so terrifying to sit there and watch it. And then she put her head down behind me and started crying. And I looked back, and there was one more Black kid that I didn't know in the back of the class, and he put his head down on the desk, and all of us were just shocked. And so I just went off on him. I just got so angry, and And I just started saying what a waste of taxpayers' money he was, and he was a racist, no good, you know what. And so the most chilling part of this was not that. The most chilling part was the door was open to the hallway, and I could see out the hallway, and the vice principal of the school was there. And I thought, oh, great, he's seeing me yell at the teacher. I'm going to get kicked out of school. And so, I'm going to get suspended. And I thought, well, if that's going to happen anyway, I might as well keep going. So I just kept taking him on and telling him how horrible, and he doesn't teach, and he's hired to teach us, and he's just, anyway, I just went off on him. And so then the bell rings, and the principal leaves, and we all huddle, and we're crying and holding each other, and we're all shaking, and it was really traumatic. And so then so I'm thinking the principal's going to contact us, or there's going to be some action. And in the meantime, myself and my friends, we all made a petition. We got over 600 signatures to get this person removed from the school, because he was clearly like doing damage and not teaching. And it was a horrific experience. So I go to the school, and a couple of us, it was like this committee we formed, and we go to the principal's office, and we present our petition. And as we do all of this, I leave, and the teacher takes me aside and says that 2 years prior, he had been fired from that same school for racism, and they rehired him. And I just was like, I can't be here. I just can't, I'm not learning anything. And it took a lot to get to school,
Right,
transportation.
right.
A lot of people don't think about poverty as when you don't have transportation, your options are limited in certain cities that don't have good public transportation. So I basically, at that time, I was making some money, and I told my mom, look, we had relatives who were married to the Osmond family singers, which were one of our relatives was married to one of the Osmonds, and they went to this American School of Correspondence school for high school, because they were all performers and entertainers. And so I sort of researched it, and I realized I could pay the monthly dues. I had enough money that I could pay for correspondence school. If my mother would let me drop out, I would, finish high school through correspondence school and go to college. So she agreed with me, and that freed me up for, a lot more time that I could work and do other things.
Yeah. I mean, I think, man, that's quite remarkable for a young teenager to have to make these very adult decisions about life. And again, I think about how that might shape your outlook on life and how you navigate life. At that point in time, did you have any idea sort of what you wanted to pursue educationally, or how did you see your sort of adult life starting to play out?
Well, I did love learning, and I knew that my high school was kind of destroying that, because it was not a great school, or at least there were some great people there, but anyway, that was a bad experience. So, but I did love learning, and in the beginning, I wanted to be a singer-songwriter, entertainer. That's sort of what I thought I would do. I played guitar, I sang, I wrote songs. My friends were all musicians. Or they were in theater, or they performing in local community theater. So I went to community college, and I took general education requirements because, of course, the fees are very low at community college. They're wonderful things because they offer an ability for low-income people to get an education. So I went to community college, and I took all kinds of arts courses, and acting and singing and dancing and guitar. And then I took, regular general education requirements toward a degree. And then I ended up getting a professional singing job in a nightclub. And I had auditioned for a working band, and they needed a replacement singer. And so I sang and played bass guitar in the band. And
How about that?
And I thought, I've arrived. I'm having a good time. I can work at night and perform and do what I love to do. And I can go to school during the day. This is great. Well, it was great until a couple of male stalkers decided to make my life miserable. So I had one person and it was particularly scary because I didn't know who the person was, but there was threatening notes being left on my car. So somebody knew which car was my car, and they knew who I was, but I didn't know who they were. And so that started up. Somebody started a campaign of terrorizing me with notes,
Yeah.
and then took a knife and cut my picture out of the marquee. And then another man was leaving very lewd and threatening messages about me at the bar, and would call the hotel, and it was like a hotel lounge bar. It
Right,
was
right, yeah.
like a private club kind of place that I was working in. It was a really nice place, except the experiences I was having were not nice. And my
No kidding.
male bandmates never had anything like that happen to them.
Right, yeah.
But I did. So I thought, this isn't fun. I could see myself, 35, 40 years old, singing in a nightclub, going nowhere. So I had a real big crisis of just like, what do I do now? I hate this. I got what
Right.
I loved, and now I hate it.
Yeah.
And so I went for a walk one day. I was really depressed. My really closest friends had moved away, and I went for a walk, and I saw this flyer on the wall that said, volunteer, a suicide hotline, volunteers needed for a crisis hotline, no experience necessary, will train.
Okay. Wow.
And I needed a paying job, but I thought, volunteer work, gosh, this sounds so interesting and intriguing. And the idea of being trained and being able to save people's lives, and just, it sounded so interesting. And so, against my more practical judgment, I took the number, and really everything I have today stems from that decision.
Okay. Wow. So I guess I'm curious, just to tie up a loose thread, when you made the decision to walk away from performing and being in the band and whatnot, like, were your bandmates aware that the stalking was happening? And
Oh yeah, they didn't care about me. The guys were there'd be like the most drunk, obnoxious guy in the crowd would go, I want to dance with Gina. I want to kiss Gina. And then they'll go, okay, you can dance with her. Go ahead, Gina. They
wow.
would throw me to the wolves. They
Oh
didn't care.
dear.
They didn't care. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't feel protected at all. It was
No
really,
kidding.
you feel really exposed. And, even I've worked with some dangerous people as a psychotherapist, but I had their name, address.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
knew where to find them. I knew where to send the cops.
You knew
I,
what you were dealing with, but
I
yeah.
knew what I was dealing with, and I had some protection. But when it's just these anonymous, and then you don't have, and the guys just thought it was funny. I think a lot of men at that time, before me too, a lot
Mhm,
of
mhm,
men, would either be like, oh, be really safe, don't go out by yourself, you're a woman, you're going to get raped,
mhm, mhm.
or they would be like, oh, we'll just harass the hell out of you, and you should think it's cute and like it.
Wow.
Because you should feel safe. So I think there was always that going on in gender dynamics. It still is. It still goes on. And because men don't police other men, and because women don't talk about it, because we don't want to be seen as victims, because
Mhm, mhm.
people hate victims. So, and you don't want to act like, and you want to be included too. If
Right,
you
right.
if you don't play along, you're not going to get hired.
Oh, that's I mean, that bothers me a lot when I hear that, you know?
It's just the truth. It's what women deal with. And I
Of
think
course,
Me
yeah.
Too is really empowering for other women too, because women often won't even talk to other women about what went on, because it it doesn't make women feel good to think about how unsafe we are.
Mhm, mhm.
And so we want to feel safe, right?
Right,
So
yeah.
we don't want to talk about all the times we've been victimized.
Mm-mm.
Um, so and people don't want to hear about it. They don't want to hear about it. And if you talk about it, you're just angry. You're being angry, unattractive person, right? And then
And I
if you
think
do
maybe a lot
talk
of
about,
people, they're not
oh, go
really
ahead.
sure how to handle it either when they hear things that are difficult. I think, if I could put it this way, before I was really, I guess, maybe emotionally intelligent or in touch with my emotions to some degree, like my wife would share something with me and I really wouldn't know how to handle it. I think I would feel more like angry and defensive because maybe I couldn't protect her. I couldn't, because she used to work as a server in a couple of different restaurants. And yeah, guys would be like awful towards her, and it would make me very angry. But I was, maybe I also felt angry because I'm like, I can't do anything about it. Like, and so I don't want to
Right.
hear about it because all it does is make me angry about that I can't do something about it.
Helpless. We don't want to feel helpless. So we want to avoid that feeling at all costs. And
Mm,
so with something that big, that's so pervasive, sometimes we just want to kind of not think about it, right?
mhm,
And
mhm.
so until there's a trigger point, right, where
Yeah,
there's something that makes everybody talk about it, and I do think talking about it is good. But I've definitely worked with young girls, mostly girls, but some boys who were molested or sexually violated as children, and they won't share it most often with anyone, their parents or anybody,
mhm.
because they don't want to upset their parents. So they will often heroically hold on to that secret for um, for a lifetime until they talk to a therapist about it.
Yeah. I mean, as a father of a toddler with another one on the way,
Oh,
uh, well,
congratulations!
thank you.
That's so
But
nice.
I, when you talk about somebody harming a child, I think about the things that run through my mind.
Yep.
The thought, if somebody was to harm my child,
Yeah.
um, you know,
Yeah.
and it's again, it's one of those really troubling aspects of our world and behavior that really puzzles me. Although, without going down a rabbit hole, sometimes I wonder if there's a lot rooted in people who have experienced abuse becoming abusers and looking to take back something they felt was taken from them, or and I think we just try to understand, like, why do these behaviors occur when they don't make sense to a rational, sane person.
Right. I mean, I think if you look at the history of abusers, the majority of them have been abused. However, the majority of abused kids do not become abusers.
Right.
So it's very important not to assume that because someone was a victim of abuse, that they're automatically suspect of becoming an abuser.
Right. Right.
Um, but it is true that hurt people. But it's also true that there are some mental illness aspects, some neurological defects that occur. One of the jobs I had early on was I worked with teenage pedophiles. So these are
Okay.
teenagers. They were all boys who were molesting small children, and
Oof.
um, they all had, really severe issues, in their family development, and and a couple of them had some severe cognitive processing problems and severe emotional immaturity. So psychologically, many of them were like the same age as their victims in
Right.
on an emotional level.
I mean, I think that's, I don't know if it's morbidly, like, fascinating to some degree, just simply trying to understand, because I
Mhm.
have an intensely curious mind, and I think I try to understand in a similar way, like, what is it that drives someone to commit behaviors like that that are so vile in a sense. But then I think about you doing that work and working with these people, and it almost goes back to that the boundaries thing we touched on in a previous conversation around maintaining professional boundaries when you're hearing things and acts these people have committed and so on, and somehow maintaining a demeanor of professionalism and not
Right. I mean,
trying to
I
act on what you hear.
the nice thing about where I worked when I worked with the pedophiles was they were in a residential treatment program, and they had been, through the criminal justice system, and this was part of their treatment and paying back to society kind of thing. And the goal was to redirect them and get them out of it. And a lot of them probably could get out of it and not make that a habit because they were still so young.
Mhm.
And the good news about the laws, in for psychotherapists is if we do suspect child abuse, we are mandated to report that.
Right. Right.
So I always tell, my clients all know that. So whenever I've had to make a child abuse report, I will tell them, look, this is not acceptable. This has to stop. This is going to, CPS is going to be involved, or,
It, and I guess maybe a question that some people might have when they hear about the nature of this kind of work, like, is, can somebody be rehabilitated, and are they aware that what they're doing, like, do they have an awareness that what they're doing is like morally wrong, and is there potential for them to be rehabilitated so they can safely exist in society?
some do and some don't. A lot of it depends on the psychology of the individual doing it. When you're dealing with a personality disorder like a psychopath, they tend to not get better. You can create conditions where they're less likely to reoffend. And, that's good, but their orientation is probably still going to be exploitive and non-empathetic. But there are some kids that, have been through the ringer and back, and they get to a secure place, and they can be rehabilitated and not reoffend.
Mm. One of the things that's remarkably disconcerting about psychopaths. Now, I think they're not quite what they're portrayed in popular media, but one of the things that's particularly maybe unsettling is they can often be very charismatic. They can often be, and so and some people might never actually see the other side of them. And I guess actually, without sharing too much of my own story, I had experience with one who I thought was a
Mm.
very close friend, and it was a number of years before the other side emerged, and I had a hard time reconciling the other individual that I saw who was not my friend, when I guess metaphorically the mask comes off and you go, this is who the real person is. And there's this cognitive
Yeah.
like disconnect.
Yeah, I think that some psychopaths are very good at at understanding other people's vulnerability and how to seduce other people to get their needs met. I do think that you can develop a really good detector for personality disordered people. The first thing I look for is genuine empathy.
Hmm.
Um,
And how
do
might
they
somebody?
cringe? Do they cringe, or does there something in their face? Like when I look
Right.
at you and I'm telling these stories, there's an emotional reaction of like empathy. When I talked about, what happened to me as a singer and stuff, I could see in your face there was some genuine empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if you don't have the empathy, you you're capable of doing just about anything. Now, it doesn't mean, most psychopaths are not killers.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
most personality disorders, there's a lot of different personality disorders, but personality disorders tend to be fixed in the sense that people tend to not develop beyond that.
Mhm, mhm,
They can learn to behave better, but they're not necessarily going to have a different character structure. Character meaning the capacity to feel for others, the capacity to take responsibility, take personal responsibility for their own behavior,
mhm,
the
mhm.
capacity to have insight and understand their own motivations. So the second thing I look for is exploitiveness. Like, are their relationships, are they attracted to people, and are they involved with people because they can exploit them or they can get
Mm.
something out of them? As opposed to, are they attracted to people because they enjoy their company, they have fun, they share common goals and values, some of the deeper reasons why we might have friends in our life.
Mm-mm. Yeah, fascinating insights, and I think you've worked with probably quite literally thousands and thousands of people in your professional career as a psychotherapist, which has given you a remarkable insight into the human psyche and whatnot. So then I wonder, just as we wind up here, there's so many more questions I have for you, but we might have to save that for another conversation. But you know, do you in a sense almost like automatically psychoanalyze people, or can you consciously or unconsciously switch it off, or switch between sort of your professional analytical mode and sort of coexisting with somebody? How do you sort of navigate that balance between having both the experience, the ability, and the education to accurately, psychoanalyze people with let's say being in a relationship and trying to maybe avoid doing that to affect the quality of the relationship?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Not very many people ask that question. It's really interesting. I was at a party with a whole bunch of therapists, uh, and there was one person who was a civilian, a non-therapist, and she was sort of shocked by the things we talked about and how intense they were,
Mhm.
and how they weren't, like, they were sort of beyond polite conversation kinds of topics. Um, but typically, when people find out what I do for a living, they will immediately assume that I'm going to, like, be in my working mode analyzing them, and that the assumption is that I might then judge them. Like,
Right.
is this
Yeah.
person sick and wacky, and
Are you going to find
what's
my
their
deepest, darkest secrets?
diagnosis? And the fact of the matter is, my husband's also a therapist,
Hmm.
and in our own relationship, we don't do we intentionally don't do the psychobabble. We don't we 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 try to relate to each other authentically without using psychological lingo on each other, because
Mhm.
it's annoying, right? And
Right.
I remember one of my therapists, one of my professors that really inspired me in college said, never trust a diagnosis based on an interpersonal conflict. So
Mm.
I don't diagnose people
Yeah.
in my personal life. And I also, back to boundaries, um, it is very easy for me to slip into counselor mode. So if somebody is grieving or they're dealing with something really intense and they're someone I love and care about, I know how to do the empathy, but I don't have
Mhm.
to try, because I'll feel the empathy for somebody I care about, right? But it
Mm.
is easy to sort of use those skills in an intense situation. But most of the time, I'm holding back
Mm.
from going into counselor mode with my friends, and on purpose, because I don't want to be uh, having them feel like I'm being acting as if I'm their therapist, right? It
Right,
feels
right.
disrespectful for your
Yeah.
friend to start acting like,
Right,
they
right,
know they know what's best for you. So I intentionally hold back a lot.
right. And lastly, does anybody ever ask you to psychoanalyze them as though it's like a party trick?
No, but they might ask me to guess their zodiac sign.
Fair enough.
but but no, I haven't had that question. No.
Oh, good. Well, if you were to guess my zodiac sign, what would you guess?
Oh gosh. Well, you that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, you kind of physically look like, you could be like a Cancer, but you are verbally, but you also have some, I don't know, you seem like you could be kind of an earth sign, so maybe Taurus, Virgo. Um, But you also seem like you're very witty, so that could be Gemini, so I don't know. I have no
That's
idea.
Yeah, just to put you on the spot there. It's kind of fun. Actually, I joke that I get four astrological signs because I was born a Capricorn, but I was supposed to be born in April, which I think would have maybe been Aries, I think, if I got it right.
Mhm. Yeah, I think
Um,
you're yeah.
and then but then the astrological calendar was off roughly a month, and so everyone who thought they were a Capricorn, it's like you're actually the one before.
Yeah, there's all these different schools of
So I'm like,
astrology, and I do not know, but it's a fun party thing to
it
ask.
is, it is. So I just tell people, I'll read all the horoscopes and pick the one I like best that falls into one of those four categories, and assume that's mine for the day, and
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's fun. Yeah, it's just well, I think what's fun about astrology is that it kind of gives you a different way of thinking about the diversity of human experience and different personality types. And that's why I sort of enjoyed personality psychology too,
yeah,
because
yeah.
we're all so different.
Well, as we wrap up here, I always like to ask my guests, if someone's listening to this conversation today, you have quite a fascinating story, and there's much more to it than I would have thought. From your time spent professionally as a singer and performer to growing up in poverty to just navigating some very intense professional situations to get to where you are today. So somebody listening to that today, this conversation, if you were to hope that they would take one thing away from this, what would that be?
I really encourage people to not underestimate the power of your own mind and your beliefs to shape your destiny, because there's so much in the new neuropsychology research showing that our beliefs and our attitudes and our thoughts change our biochemistry,
Mm,
and they can affect how well we heal from illness, how we age, how much our exercise will shape our musculature, even. Like if we're believing that our exercise is good for us and it's working, it will work
yeah,
better than if we don't. And I'm
yeah,
just learning that a lot of, I think, what got me through accidentally was that I did always have goals and some kind of hopeful vision, even through the darkest times, that there was something more hopeful out there. And that kept me from turning off my seeking system, the seeking part, that things can
right.
get better, the hopefulness. So I would inspire everyone to really check out your beliefs and make sure your beliefs are working on your own behalf,
Hmm, hmm.
because you can change them. They're made up.
Right. I
And
love that.
why not make up beliefs that, like, this aspirin is good for me, it will cure my headache, or, you know, my
Yeah.
exercise is making my muscles stronger.
Mm, mm.
This food is good for me. My friends are good people. These kind of things shape our physiology and how we manage stress. So anyway, that's what I would encourage people: watch your beliefs and make sure they're working on your behalf.
If you're gonna make beliefs, make them good ones.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
Gina, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's really been a fascinating conversation, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Pleasure for me too, John.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become, and I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.